Turns out Cancun Cruz was in Europe over the weekend. Ted Cruz caught vacationing as tragedy strikes again. The Daily Beast reports that Ted Cruz was vacationing in Europe as floods ripped through central Texas, killing at least 89 people, including 27 campers and counselors from a summer camp. The Texas senator was spotted visiting the Parthenon in the Greek capital Athens with his wife Heidi on Saturday evening. Brother, are you joking? Are you fucking kidding me? Oh, brother. Busted again. Motherfucking Cancun Cruz, this time in Greece. Oh, my Lord. This man is... I mean, listen, guys. You have to understand something. As many of you work tirelessly day in, day out with no hope of a summer vacation, both because you don't have the disposable income to pay for a summer vacation and also because your boss will never let you go. You have to understand, Ted Cruz is a really hard job. And he just did his really hard job when he went to vote for the murder poor people bill. Okay. And after he did this like really, really difficult thing of voting for the continuation of tax cuts for the wealthiest in American society, while simultaneously murdering poor people by cutting off their access to Medicaid and cutting off their access to SNAP, food assistance programs that they need necessary for survival, he had to obviously take a big vacation, one that will never be afforded to you, just like he has a platinum healthcare program as a consequence of being a senator. You will never have that, obviously. His job relies on you. His job basically is telling you don't deserve that, okay? Something to also remember, something to also consider. But he had to celebrate. He had to celebrate with his family. He had to celebrate with his family on vacation, okay? A lot of you are being unnecessarily rude and ruthless to Ted Cruz. I mean, he had a really tough go at it, okay?
I will say for many of us, those are friends and neighbors who've lost children. Got multiple kids who go to school with my girls. The mayor asked for prayers.
Dude, this motherfucker is also like trying to be like, we're all victims here. It's like, bro, you were in Greece. Okay? Like, oh, we're all victims here. Let me tell you, okay? Me, Ted Cruz, I'm a victim of this flooding. You don't understand. Half of the people who live in that area, Ted Cruz literally voted to cut their Medicaid. You understand me? Like, that's coming down the line. Half of the people, he voted to cut their Medicaid and also has actively petitioned alongside the Trump administration to cut FEMA funding or to reallocate FEMA resources to the immigration detention scheme that this administration is doing, the immigration enforcement scheme that this administration is doing. And after doing all that, which is a lot of work, it's just a lot of hard work, he had to fuck off and go to Greece.
And I want to say thank you to the millions of Texans, to the millions of Americans, to the millions of people all over the world right now who are praying for Texas and praying for those parents. Going through this grief, it is going to take...
Do you think a Zoran-style campaign can work in Texas? Absolutely. It can work everywhere. It needs to be adjusted to whatever the expectations of the state is. But overall, the Zoran thing, the Zoran campaign is a national one. We saw this with Bernie Sanders.
Love, it is going to take friends and family embracing and hugging and holding them while they weep. And it's going to take the church. With every disaster, one of the things we see here in Texas is the church steps up and the church helps and the church feeds and clothes and comforts. This morning I met with a group of chaplains who've been going through the incredibly difficult process of talking to mom and dad after mom and dad who just lost the most precious person they ever knew. And those chaplains are just trying to love them and show God's love. So I want to say we will come through this. To those in the midst of grief right now, that might seem hard to fathom. But Texas...
Yeah, church should replace the welfare state. Here's another great take from this. Obviously, the initial reports are coming out already. Officials feared the flood risk of Texan youth camps were imminent, but rejected a warning system, deeming it too expensive. Okay? Officials feared flood risk to youth camps, but rejected a warning system. And Adam Johnson says, one thing the left, such as it is, needs to emphasize over and over is that local/state budget constraints are entirely artificial. They're manufactured austerity. If the federal government can invent $38 billion out of thin air to fund a genocide, it can afford to build flood warning systems. These budget shortfalls are not real. The federal government can invent money and transfer it to states for essential projects whenever it wishes. We simply choose not to because subjecting 50 states and thousands of municipalities to a game of neoliberal bum fights empowers capital. This person doesn't understand the point. He says local state budget constraints are real. They are, except the federal government can aid and abet. Okay? The federal government can always offer additional funds and additional resources in times of necessity. It is always a matter of interest. It is not a matter of, it is the biggest hurdle. The biggest hurdle here is never, oh, where will we find the money? Because there's always money for war. The biggest hurdle is, how do we actually reallocate these resources to these sorts of incredibly important and sometimes costly prevention methods? The conversation around deficits only become a serious point of contention when the expenditures we're talking about help the working poor. Okay? They only talk about how will we fund this whenever it's something that helps you out. The government literally only talks about how we're going to fund this. How are we going to fund this? This is so costly. Whenever it's something like you getting healthcare, it's something like you getting the proper education, it's something like your infrastructure getting the proper funds. There is never a question in either party about how are we going to pay for it when it comes down to funding war, funding endless militarism, funding all of these imperial adventures overseas. There is never a question about how we're going to pay for it ever. Every single year, every single congressional session, we increase the military budget by hundreds of billions of dollars. Even in this last Trump tax cut bill, the big beautiful bill, the big bomb for the working poor, there was $150 additional billion for the military. There was $175 billion for Trump's immigration enforcement scheme. There's always money for the military. There's always money for the police at the local budgets. Okay. And there's always money for some kind of enforcement mechanism. There's never enough money for these sorts of resource allocation initiatives when it's saving people's lives. Here's the New York Times on this as well. As floods hit, key roles were vacant at weather service offices in Texas. Some experts say staff shortages might have complicated forecasters' ability to coordinate responses with local emergency management officials. Do not let these fucking assholes get away with it. Okay? They'll say thoughts and prayers. They'll say now is not the time. That's the thing that I told you. Initially, when people ask these questions like, how could this have happened? The first response from Republicans will be, oh, now is not the time. Now is not the time. No, it is the time. When is the appropriate time? They do this with mass shootings too, which aren't even fucking natural disasters to begin with. Now is not the time. Don't politicize this. Now is not the time. Don't politicize it. It's like you politicized it. Oh. You are responsible for these preventable deaths. You are responsible. If you are a Republican politician, you are especially responsible for these deaths. This is what you wanted. This is what you actively designed society around.
Will come through this. And I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to these gentlemen here who are working. They are not sleeping. They are working every day. Thank you to the families. Thank you to the Salvation Army. Thank you to everyone who is just reaching out and saying, how can I help? We will come through this, and we'll come through this together. Thank you. And now we'll take questions.
Senator, you talked about how you know kids here, how you've taken your own kids to camp. Was it ever communicated to you that there was a need, that it was a priority to have a warning system so people had a chance to escape something like this?
Well, listen, I think anytime you're dealing with major rivers, there's a risk of flooding, and there's always been a risk of flooding, particularly on the Guadalupe River. I will say, in the wake of every tragedy, there are things that are predictable. One of the things that's predictable is that you see some people engaging in, I think, partisan games and trying to blame.
See, there you go. There's always a chance of disaster. God willed it. God willed it. God is great. God is good. We don't know the ways in which God works, but don't politicize it. I told you, right on script. Now is not the time, and this is a natural disaster. It is what it is. It happens. Okay? Dude, the entire purpose of mankind that has been able to go to the fucking moon, that has been able to build ginormous dams, that has been able to build massive skyscrapers is to overcome nature. Okay? And yes, part of that hubris is what's causing these kinds of extreme weather events to take place because of anthropogenic climate change. But there is still so much more that we can do. Okay, there's still so much more that we could do in terms of proper prevention. Not building campsites and not building campsites around, for example, a riverbed. Or if we do, ensuring that we have the proper resources allocated to warning systems. That's why I gave like the Pompeii example, where it's like we just keep rebuilding in the ash cheeks of a volcano over and over again, and then the volcano explodes and the lava takes over the city, and then we rebuild the city once again, and we say, it won't happen again. It won't happen again. And we don't even monitor the tectonic activities. We don't even we underfund we underfund the warning systems ahead of time so that there's no evacuation. We just refuse to learn any lessons from any of this, and it's so devastating. Sorry, 10 missing now. How many dead? There are more than 80 people that have died so far.
Political opponents for a natural disaster. And you see that with a hurricane, with a tornado, with a wildfire, with this flooding, where people immediately say, well, the hurricane is Donald Trump's fault. Look, that I think most normal.
No one thinks the hurricane is Donald Trump's fault, jackass. Everyone says that the Republican Party has actively worked against, with the unlimited resources we have, the Republican Party in the United States of America is actively creating a more harmful environment, a more dangerous environment. I don't think that people behave in the ways that they're claiming. That is the Republicans that will say, oh, the hurricane is Joe Biden's fault. Okay? Nobody says natural disasters are a direct consequence of like whoever the fucking president is, unless you're a Republican and the president is a Democrat. Okay? They say these things are happening with a greater frequency and greater magnitude. We have to have the proper resources allocated to prevention, to infrastructure hardening, and to proper warning systems. And then we have to have the proper resources distributed back to the recovery and rebuilding efforts. That is what people say. And the Republicans have steadily created a hurdle against such things.
Americans know that's ridiculous. And I think this is not a time for partisan finger pointing and attacks. Now, after we come through search and rescue, after we come through the process of rebuilding, there will naturally be a period of retrospection where you look back and say, okay, what exactly transpired? What was the timeline? And what could have been done differently to prevent this loss of life? And that's a natural process. I think it should not happen in a bitter and partisan sense, but it should happen in a reasonable sense of saying, what lessons can we learn? And I will give an example. You know, Houston's my hometown. If you live on the Gulf Coast, we get hurricanes. That's part of living on the Gulf Coast as hurricanes hit. And I do think Texas as a whole has learned over time how to deal more effectively with hurricanes. And so you look here, we know the National Weather Service put out an emergency warning just after 1 a.m. and a second emergency warning just after 4 a.m. Now, obviously, most people at 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. are asleep. And so I think we will have a reasonable conversation about, A, are there any ways to have earlier detection? And some of that, the limits of a flash flood, they're very difficult because they can arise so quickly. But everyone would agree in hindsight, if we could go back and do it again, we would evacuate particularly those in the most vulnerable areas, the young children in the cabins closest to the water. We would remove them and get them to higher ground if we could go back and do it again. Obviously, everyone would. The people in RVs by the river's edge. We know in disasters like this, RVs and mobile homes are particularly susceptible, whether a flood or a hurricane or a tornado, they're particularly susceptible to that. And so my hope is, in time, we will learn some lessons to implement to next time, and there will be another flood, there will be another disaster.
He's wrong. I mean, this is a lie also. This is literally a fucking lie. Okay? When he says we will learn from these lessons, his previous response and his current response, as a matter of fact, shows that he's not interested in learning any of the lessons. He literally said, there's nothing we can do about it. You know, these things happen. And then turning around and being like, oh, well, you know, we'll figure it out after the fact. We'll figure out what went wrong here after the fact. It's like, no, you're just pushing it down when it's no longer important in the public's eye, when it's no longer newsworthy. This is a defensive posture against. This is a defensive posture that is the opposite of problem solving. Okay, an issue happens. People seek out answers when it is the most prescient, and these guys desperately move the attention away. And delay with the hopes that they don't ever have to answer these questions. Okay? He's not lying. They'll learn what other publicly funded services they can cut, maybe the emergency text warning system next. Republicans have become so ghoul-like. I mean, they've always been like this, chatter. Yeah, you mean salient. Sure, salient's a better word. Yes, salient. When the issue is most salient. When people are actually paying attention, when people are demanding answers in this time of crisis, they don't want to give answers in this time of crisis on purpose, because if they were to properly analyze the situation as we have done so far, even with like the limited amount of information we have thus far, we very quickly arrive at the real villains in the story, which happens to be the fucking Republican Party. Okay? The people that are actively underfunding these systems of prevention, alerts, and analysis.
Next time there's a flood, I hope we have in place processes to remove especially the most vulnerable from harm's way. But I think that's going to be a process that will take a careful examination of what happened and how can we implement processes better in the future to prevent this same loss of life.
Senator, there were claims that the National Weather Service sent that first flash flood warning that should have alerted phones at 1:14 in the morning. But we have a federal public database maintained by PBS Warn, that says the first emergency alert wirelessly here in this area to Kerr County.
It's like, oh man, how could this have happened? How could this thing that I worked hard on, how could it have happened? I didn't realize when I cut the funding and advocated to cut the funding by cutting the fat, by trimming the fat in the federal government, that these already underfunded resources comprised of woke gay scientists were actually doing woke gay science in the form of figuring out when how devastating flash floods might look like. I don't know how this could have happened. Guy who literally is responsible for it.
It was not until after 9 a.m. That was more than 4 hours after the severe flooding had come to this area. Did you know that? Have you seen that? And what's your response, knowing the state and...
Yeah, look, he said the same thing in 2018. Senator Cruz, we will rebuild together because that's who Texans are. Surveys flood damage in Burnett and Llano County, urges Texans to heed warnings from local officials. When asked about the rebuilding process, Senator Cruz noted the bipartisan cooperation of the Texas delegation in the wake of Hurricane Harvey and the more recent flooding events. I'm amazed at the bipartisan cooperation we saw in the wake of Harvey. Harvey now goes down in history as the second most costly natural disaster in U.S. history, and we have bipartisan cooperation. First concern is getting people out of harm's way, Senator Cruz said. If there's more flooding that comes, and some of the weather reports suggest they may be coming, then please take seriously if an evacuation order is given. Don't risk it. Don't think that you can make it through. Every single damn time, it's like the same script that they hit. Same footnotes. Same bullet points. Thoughts and prayers. God is good. God is great. How could this have happened? We will figure out how this could have happened, and we'll make sure that it doesn't happen again, as they literally work to make it happen again and again and again and again, and make things worse in the process.
And NWS in recent months by this administration?
So I don't know the source for what you're saying. All of the public reporting I've seen is that there were two alerts that went out, one just after 1 a.m., one after 4 a.m. I can tell you, I talked about the partisan finger pointing. I think there have been some eager to point at the National Weather Service and say cuts there led to a lack of warning. I think that's contradicted by the facts, and if you look at the facts in particular,
look. Direct question. Let's see.
A.m. one after 4 a.m. I can tell you, I talked about the partisan finger pointing. I think there have been some eager to point at the National Weather Service and say cuts there led to a lack of warning.
No, those cuts were good. We saved so much money. Excuse me, sir. Talking about these cuts, you're kind of making it seem like I need to take accountability for things that I've advocated for, and I don't like it. How dare you, sir? This is not time for partisan finger pointing, sir. These cuts were good. These cuts were great. We need more of them.